Hi, everyone. Oh, is it echoing?
Sounds good to me.
Okay, it's echoing for me, but as long as it's just me, I can handle that. Hi, everyone. So I have the pleasure of introducing Rebecca Phelps, who's the author of Downworld. Just as a little bit of background about me and why I'm even here. My name is Natalie Walton. I wrote the book Revenge of the Sluts. Rebecca and I have the pleasure of both being authors through Wattpad books, and that's how we were introduced to each other. I read Downworld as an ARC, so super early before publication. I loved it. I still love it. I raved about it on Goodreads. It's one of my favorite books of 2020. So I'm really excited to be here, and I'm going to read Rebecca's bio. So Rebecca Phelps is an actress, screenwriter, novelist, and mom based in Los Angeles. As an actress, she studied at Steppenwolf Theater in Chicago, Boston University, and the University of Wisconsin-Madison before appearing in a string of independent films and theater in LA. Her screenplays include The Doll in the Garden, an adaptation of the award-winning children's book by Mary Downing Hahn. On her hit blog, Rebecca and her friend Chris dish on all kinds of adaptations from Outlander to Handmaid's Tale. Rebecca's debut YA novel, Downworld, is the recipient of a Wattpad Award for Best Young Adult Novel 2019. All right, we're super excited to have you.
Yay, I'm so excited to you're here.
So just kind of like kicking it off and doing my favorite question, which is, how does it feel actually having your book out in the world?
It's so weird. It's so weird because
I definitely get it.
It's gonna happen. Like they tell you, they're like, it's gonna be in bookstores, it's gonna be distributed. You're like, okay, great, awesome. But like until you walk into Barnes and Noble and your book is there, you're like, oh my God, they were kidding. It really happened. It doesn't feel real until you see it.
Yeah, no, I absolutely 100% understand that. Even when I got the books like shipped to my house, I was like, what do you mean this is like a real thing that I'm actually like holding in my hands?
It's so surreal because you try for so long and you just think, well, I mean, I've been doing this for a while. I was writing screenplays, I was writing books, I was writing, whatever. And, you get to the point where you're kind of like, is anything going to come of all this? Like I'm writing all this stuff. Is this ever going to get to that next level that, we wrote the adaptation of that great Mary Downing Hahn book. And it was such a great script. I loved working on it. I wrote it with my husband, but the movie didn't get made. And so you're kind of like, all right, well, fine. I'll just write another thing and no one will read that either. And it'll be fine. And then you write something that takes off and it's like, oh, hey, that worked. That's great.
No, I definitely understand. And actually kind of going off of that, can you explain a little bit about what your writing journey looked like? I mean, like, was the novel thing something where you were always thinking you were going to end up there? Or was it just kind of, it happened and you had this idea?
I didn't. I mean, when I was younger, I was just going to be an actress. That's all I ever wanted to do until about 24. And then I just had an idea for a script. I just started to write a screenplay. I was working on a movie, like out in the desert. And I learned about the silent film star Clara Bow, which I didn't know anything about her. And I came home from that movie shoot and I was like fascinated with her. And I started researching her and I wrote a whole screenplay about her. And I showed it to the director of the film we'd been making. And I was like, is this any good? And he read it. And it was like 170 pages. Like for a screenplay, it was twice as long as a script should be. But he read it. And he gave me really good notes and everything. And I was like, okay, great. And nothing happened with it, but I just kept writing more and more of them. And eventually I started to work on a longer story, like a novel that I didn't finish. But yeah, I never really thought I'm going to write novels now until the idea for Downworld came to me like 5-6 years. It was probably 6 years ago. It was young. My kids are young now, but I remember they were in cribs when I was writing it. So it was like 6 years ago. And yeah, it was the first book I finished.
That's so exciting. And then how did you end up on Wattpad and all of this? What was your journey for that?
I finished the book and I was querying some agents and I really didn't know how to break in because novel writing the whole world was so new to me. I only knew, I'm in LA, I know screenwriters and I know actors and that's all the people I know. And so I had this novel and everyone's like, that's great. I don't know what you should do with it, but that's awesome that you did that. I'm like, thank you. And then a friend of ours said, my teenage daughter reads all these books on Wattpad. You should check it out. And of course I didn't know what it was because I don't know things. And so I looked it up And I saw some really popular book that had like 1 million comments, and I read it and I was like, that's a lot. That's a lot of interaction. I don't know if I'm ready for that. So for about a year, I created an account and then I didn't even look at it. And then a year later, I was like, I'm going to put my book on that Wattpad site that my friend told me about. And I stuck it on there. It was June of 2019. I stuck it on there. And then I literally like didn't know what to do with it. I was like, I have a book on Wattpad. And everyone's like, great. Turns out so do 1 billion other people. So I didn't know that was like not that special. But I got really lucky, and Wattpad discovered it, put it on a list, recommended it to people. And then like a month later, it won a Lottie Award. And it's just been great ever since. It's just been ever since amazing.
Oh, that's so exciting.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, no, I definitely feel like with writing, it's kind of you just keep hoping that something will stick. Like, it's just like, you really just keep working on things. Like for me, it was like, I don't know. I feel like I just kept waiting for that one idea where I was like, this is the one, like I can actually write this one, rather than just like letting it kind of like fester and just like not end up turning into anything at all. So that's just, it's really exciting when it does actually develop.
And sometimes like with your book, it's about finding a hook where you're like, okay, this is not just a story, but it's a story that means something, and the characters are interesting, and I could see where the characters would go with this story. That's how I felt when I read yours, where I was like, oh, okay, great. So it's like a whodunit and a thriller, but it's also feminist, and also it's like, I was like, this is great. It's working on every level. I love it. So, but sometimes you start something and you're like, this is only working on one level, and I don't think it's going to go anywhere.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. You're like, okay, so this is cool in concept and in theory, but like, will I actually be able to write it? I don't think so. Like, I just, for some reason, there's just certain things, or it's like, maybe not now, maybe later, we'll see what happens kind of idea. But yeah, it's really, there's something so exciting about when it feels like all the pieces kind of come together. At least that's how it felt for me when I was writing Revenge the Sluts. I was like, this actually makes sense to me now. Like, this is a full idea.
It feels like a full idea. You feel like this has legs. I can see where this will go. And that's interesting when you're writing it.
Yeah, no, definitely. And then kind of focusing on that a little bit, how did Downworld even come about? So you mentioned it kind of forming about 6 years ago, you started writing it. Like, what was the process for that?
You know, I really did. I just had this vision of the doors, the 3 doors. So the premise is, you know, the character Marina discovers 3 doors beneath her high school, and they're labeled yesterday, today, and tomorrow, and they lead to something. And at the time, I didn't even know what they led to, but I was like, oh, she opens the door and it's like this luminescent light coming out of it, and it leads to something, and it's kind of mystical and sci-fi, but it's also based in reality. And there's something on the other side of the door that she desperately wants. And I didn't know what it was yet, but I kind of tied it into what I wanted when I was a teenager, and, you know, just having crushes on boys and wanting to fix things that were kind of broken in my family and in what I was trying to do. And it just all came together. And it really came together. Like, once I had that connection of the doors and desperately wanting something, it came together, and I was like, okay, that's a story.
No, it's amazing, like, how quickly it can work. Like, you find that one missing piece and you're like, wait, this is like an actual book now. It's not just, you know, this loose idea or this like one scene that I have in mind. It's like actually something I can present to somebody. It's really, no, I think that's one of my favorite parts of writing, is being able to do that.
I know. Yeah. When you have that aha moment, you're like, oh, I can do this. This is going to work. It's great. Yeah.
And so one of my other favorite things about reading and writing and kind of like learning about authors is realizing that a lot of authors put things from themselves into the books that they're writing, if that makes sense. So like for me, writing Revenge of the Sluts was like a way of being able to geek out about like journalism and like my background in like sexuality and gender studies and sociology, that kind of idea. So like for you, where does Downworld tie into that? Like, did you have like a sci-fi phase? Are you like what parts?
You know, it's funny. I know most of my screenplays are not sci-fi, although I have one that's strong sci-fi. That's like complete, like other world. But no, it was with this book, I never really sat down and said, I'm going to be a sci-fi author now and I'm going to write sci-fi. It was really just that I knew there was going to be this magical realism element to a story that was otherwise a really traditional coming of age story. But I knew it would have this wish fulfillment element to it of what if you could go into a door and fix something that's really strongly broken in your life? What if there was something else on the other side? And it ended up becoming a sci-fi book, and now it's a sci-fi trilogy, which, I had to sort of research all the science, because I ended up thinking like, all right, if it's going to have portals, I have to have a good reason for portals. Like, I don't like it when I read a portal book and the portals are just there for no reason. Like, there's got to be a scientific reason. So I started researching like nuclear energy and tying all of that in, and then just geeking out on history, because I just love reading about history. And so it ended up just getting to marry the research of history, the research of science, and of learning about science for the first time, which was fun, and tying it into a narrative that was really personal. So for me, I was like, oh, this is great. It's all the things I like.
Yeah, that's so exciting. And then how did you end up like preparing to write science fiction? Was it you read a whole bunch, like, do you feel like you studied science fiction, or did you just kind of go for it? Like,
I didn't. I mean, I've read some of the big ones. I remember like even researching this, reading like most of the Foundation trilogy. Didn't finish it. Don't tell anyone. It's hard. It's like this big. But I grew up reading like Kurt Vonnegut and stuff. I grew up reading books by authors who just broke the rules. And I remember reading Kurt Vonnegut in high school, and reading books where he was like, he just had things that didn't make any sense, where he was like, inanimate objects would start talking, and you'd be suddenly in another country, and you're like, oh, when you're writing a book, you can do whatever you want. How fun. So there was a little bit of not necessarily wanting to write in the vein of a sci-fi author so much as wanting to write where the story went, even if that wasn't linear and didn't make a lot of sense. Like, I love Gabriel Garcia Marquez and that magical realism of just, this character's going to fly away now, and then we'll see what happens next. You're like, what do you mean she flies away? Well, it's a book. She flew away. It's just, I can write it however I want. So there was a lot of just that, like, I'm going to break the rules of this world that we live in.
No, that's so exciting. That's such a fun way of looking at it too. And I feel like we almost have like opposite approaches, but in really interesting ways. Because I feel like for me, it's very grounded in reality, and I struggle with that ability to just be like, it's a book, like, have fun with it. It's okay. Like, you don't have to keep it strictly to real life. I don't know. I really like that approach. I feel like it's very, very free, and it's like that's what books can be. Like, it should be fun and it should be interesting.
Yes, and you should be able to just go on this mental journey that's not literal, because otherwise, you could just live your real life if you wanted to experience reality.
No, definitely, yeah. And then let's see. So what was the most challenging part of writing Downworld? And then kind of on the flip side of that, what was your favorite part of writing it? Like, what was the whole process kind of like for you? And
I gotta say, the most challenging part was having the 2 young kids at home, and just, it still is. I'm writing the 3rd book in the series now, and I don't know if you've heard, there's this global epidemic. So everybody's home all the time. And just, I think finding time to do it with the day job and the kids, and finding the time was the hard part. And then, and then when you do have those windows of time, when you do have an hour here or whatever, you need to sort of force yourself into that zone. When I was acting, it was always like, well, rehearsal is now, and all the other actors are ready. So you do it now. You don't have time to do it later. But with writing, you're alone, and there's a lot of like, you need to force yourself to get off the internet and get into your zone and start writing. So that was honestly just the logistics of writing a book. Is really, really hard. It is. And I can see why a lot of people start them and don't finish them. And it's impressive if you can even finish something. And then writing about the science was hard because I don't know much about it, but I loved researching it. Like, that was so much fun to me. And like reading all the stuff I found on the internet about like, how exactly do cooling rods stop a nuclear reaction? That's fun to me. But then and then that's the part I enjoy too, I guess, is just, sometimes you get into these zones and you discover characters who you didn't think were going to be a very significant part of the story, and suddenly you're like, oh no, he's going to be a huge part of the story. In fact, he's going to be the impetus for her to make this huge change. And that's interesting to see how these fictional people you made up change each other. That's fun. I love that.
Do you feel like the book evolved very much over time? Or did you kind of have that like set idea in mind?
No, I didn't know where it was going. When especially with Downworld, I really didn't know where it was going. I had a very loose 3-act structure, but as I was writing it, it went out the window because that's just not where it ended up. Of course. Like, oh, I'm really glad I made a plan. That was great. Yeah, it went out the window. No, but and so yeah, it did evolve. And the first draft of Downworld was really long. It was probably 40,000 words longer than it is now. And so a lot of the editing for that book was cutting, and trying to find the heart of the story that wouldn't suffer from getting rid of. There were some B characters who didn't kind of ended up on the cutting room floor. And you're like, I'm sorry, Christy, you didn't really make it into the book. There was no time for you. But you end up, when you're doing that, you do kind of end up going, all right, well, what's really important to this story? What moves the story forward and what isn't that important? So it makes you a better writer, that process of cut to the chase.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and it's a really hard part to kind of learn. I think it's a difficult skill to be like, oh, I don't need all of this actually.
No, I don't need the 40-page scene at the football game. Like, it really didn't move the plot forward. We could just get rid of it. Yeah.
It's like, yeah, that was definitely something for me to try and learn too. I think when I was working on mine, it ended up being pretty long and I was like, this sucks. Like, this is like, what do you do at that point? But it's a really, I think, important skill. And I also think it just, at least for me, and you can speak on like how this works for you, but like, I feel like writing the full manuscript, just like going for it and just seeing how long it ends up and just letting the plot kind of develop naturally is genuinely beneficial. Like, I feel like my story became stronger in the process because I kind of let myself give filler and test things out along the first draft and see what stuck.
There's also, like, when I was writing the first one, I didn't know anyone was I wasn't writing it for Wattpad. I was writing it for myself. And so I did go off on these tangents and I let the book just kind of go wherever it wanted to go. But now with the second 2 books, I posted them, week by week on Wattpad, and there's readers waiting for it. And so the writing I know is tighter on the second 2 books because you're gearing it to how the audience is going to react to it as opposed to just whatever you feel like writing that week. So that it does change. Knowing who's going to read it changes how you write it. There's no question.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely understand. It's really, I do feel like there's a different kind of writing style that goes into, like, we call it kind of like, online versus offline writing. So it's, are you someone who updates week to week, or are you someone who like, writes an entire manuscript on your own and then comes in and posts it, which is what I ended up doing with Revenge of the Sluts. And it's a totally different experience. Like, when I first started out on Wattpad, I was a week to week. And then I tried out basically offline writing just to see if I liked it, just to like kind of understand my own writing and what I needed from it and what I wanted from it. And I do think it's kind of a, there's pros and cons to both sides. So I definitely understand.
You probably end up with something more commercial when you're posting it because you're really taking into account how people will react to it. And I know with Downworld, it was more about me and what I felt like saying and what I was going through. As and as a young mom too, to write this story about a teenager was interesting because it made me kind of revisit things I hadn't thought about in a long time and kind of put them into perspective now that I'm older, now that I have my own family. It really messes with your head a little bit to sort of think, okay, well, I made it through that tough time and now I'm here, and that's kind of cool. So I think a lot of that feeling too got into the books of, you're going to make it through this. This is hard, but you're going to make it through this.
Yeah, and actually that brings up a really interesting question about why you ended up in young adult fiction specifically. What was kind of did you know you were going to be writing a young adult novel, or did it just kind of happen to be?
I knew this protagonist was a teenager because I knew that she had some growing up to do. And I think if she'd been in her 20s, there would have been a feeling of like, shouldn't you have figured this out already, honey? But by making her, she's turning 16 in the first book. And I think that was what I kind of needed to revisit at that point when I was a new mom of the journey from first becoming an adult and how I got through my 20s. And I think that was sort of where I wanted to explore. My next book might be about a 25-year-old. I don't know, because it might be, in fact, I have started another book, and it is about a 25-year-old. So there you go. Maybe I'm just working my way through my life. And sort of doing little therapy sessions on myself of, well, here's what I needed to work out when I was 25.
No, I kind of love that, honestly. I think fiction is such an interesting way of kind of thinking about yourself and thinking about other people and kind of just like processing things. Like, I know I've always treated writing like a diary, and it's like not necessarily good writing because I'm just kind of, I think, writing to write in a lot of cases, but it's like, I think there are times when it's genuinely beneficial and it makes such a like moving and such a personal read for other people, and it really does feel so meaningful, which I think, at least for me, really helps kind of with finishing a book, because I know there's a certain point almost always when I'm like, oh, do I really want to finish this? Like, can I actually finish this? Like, this is a lot for me. It's just like writing is a lot. Writing a novel is a lot. I can't believe I'm doing this to myself. But then it's like, because I have that personal connection, or I have something I kind of want to like say with what I'm writing, I feel like that's the drive that keeps me going, even when I'm like, oh, writing's the worst thing I've ever done. Like,
there's no question. There's some therapy that goes into writing these things. And even though Marina's so different from me, I mean, we're completely different people, but a lot of her insecurities were mine. A lot of her doubts and a lot of the things she needed to learn about family and about herself were absolutely what I had to learn when I was younger. So yeah, there's a feeling when you finish the book of, I finished that therapy session. This is great. I'm so much better now.
And do you think the process has been about the same for you for 2 and 3? I mean, like, how are the books going? How have you evolved as a novelist over time?
The books, it's so funny, 2 and 3 are different. And part of it is that since I'm posting it week by week, the chapters are just shorter. The chapters are tight and short, and they end on a cliffhanger. And it's just, it's designed to get people back next Friday, as opposed to necessarily getting to the very, very end of the book. It's more about, come back next Friday and I'll tell you what happens. So that has changed. The technical aspect of writing it for a different audience has changed. But I also just feel like I understand novel writing better. Coming from screenplays, I thought it was going to be such a different art form when I started writing Downworld. I really thought it was going to be completely different from screenplays, because screenplays are so tight. And I was like, this is a novel. It's going to be really long. And I ended up making it way too long because it was just a bunch of word vomit that I needed to really tighten up. But now I think as I'm writing the third book, and I'm almost done with the third book, I feel like I found the rhythm of it. I feel like I found how to make the chapters move, but not feel rushed, and how to have them land in a place, which is, a skill that I think you can only learn by doing. I think you just need to do it and do it and do it. And eventually you're like, oh, hey, I think I'm getting good at this.
No, that's definitely, I feel like that's one of the big steps for even getting to the point of writing a novel and then committing to actually finishing it, is just like recognizing you just have to do it. You have to just get better, because it's going to suck. Like, it's like, I feel like everyone kind of just has to go through a stage where they read something and they're like, oh, I can't believe I wrote this. This is terrible. Like,
oh, I will not read my early screenplays. I know they're bad. I could tell you right now they're bad. Because you can read a million books on how to do something, but until you actually do it, you're not going to see where your pitfalls are and how you can overcome them.
That's definitely trial and error. It's a whole growing process, and it's just, I mean, I saw, I think it was like maybe a tweet or something, or maybe it's a quote from somebody. I honestly have no idea who to attribute it to, but it's this idea that like, you don't necessarily want your first book to be like your best one. Like, you want to keep improving over time. And I always really like that, because I feel like there's a lot of pressure to come out the door and just really like have that book. And it's like, I mean, of course you want to love every book that you publish and, a lot of the things that you write, but there's something really comforting, I think, about being like, you know what, as a writer, I am going to evolve. I'm going to have a really long career with a lot of different ideas and a lot of time to kind of explore what I want to do.
My husband says it to me all the time. Every time he's like, this isn't the best thing you're ever going to write. And I'm like, there's a compliment in there. I'm going to take it.
It's like, it's definitely kind of a feeling of like, okay, great. Like, I'll just keep working on it then. Awesome.
You're going to get better. You're going to get better and better and better. I know. And it's hard when your very first book does get published, because you're like, yay, you're so excited. But at the same time, you're like, in 10 years, would I have wanted to write it differently? And the answer is probably, but it'll be too late then, and you'll write something else in 10 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I was just thinking about how nice it would be if we could do the equivalent of like a director's cut, but like an author's cut, something where it's like you can go back and be like, okay, this is what I actually wanted to say if my publisher didn't have to limit me for like the sake of
If I could have written the 1,000-page version of this book, here's the things that would have been in it. I know.
Yeah,
Although it's funny because when you see the director's cut of movies, a lot of times you look at it and you're like, actually, I like the shorter one better. Like,
yeah, you definitely.
You didn't need, and you're like, okay, fine. So
yeah, it's really, whenever I'd get like editor notes or anything like that, I'd be like, really, we have to cut that? Like, really, we have to work on that? And then I think about it, or I'll like go back and visit it during editing, or I was doing the final pass for the book before submitting it, and I was like, yeah, all right, my editor was onto something. It's fine.
Yeah.
She's always
Most
right.
of my editor notes were, this science is really confusing. Can you clarify? And I'm like, right, I know, you're right.
I'm like, okay, cool, got it. Like, yeah, it's really, every comment I got, I was like, okay, great, pointed out the one thing I didn't want you to see.
You're good. That's what they're there for. They're there to see the one thing that you were trying to hide. Like,
yep.
I know. It's fun
No,
though. It's fun though.
I really get it. Yeah. Oh, it's really fun. It's a whole like you were mentioning earlier about getting like into the writing zone, and I feel like I've been going in and out of it throughout this whole kind of like pandemic / quarantine / kind of like, adjusting to this new world that we're in. And it's like, whenever I have those moments, I'm like, wow, this is incredible. Like, no wonder I talk so highly of writing. No wonder I finish projects. Then I'll have moments when I'm like, how do I write books? Like, I can't even form like a sentence right now. Like, I just can't get there.
Oh, when I'm talking to my kids, I'm barely speaking English. Yeah. Which is part of why I have to go into writer mode when I finally get a chance to work on the books.
Yeah, no, I definitely do. Do you feel like the pandemic at all has like affected your writing? Because you mentioned starting about 6 years ago, which would be, obviously pre-pandemic. So it's, do you feel like your scheduling and the way that you write, or is it harder or easier for you to focus?
I think the book itself is darker. The third book that I've been writing this whole year is exploring some kind of dark themes. And I don't know if it's necessarily one-to-one correlation with the pandemic, but there's no question that that's where everyone kind of is. And that a lot of the music I've been listening to for inspiration has been a lot sadder. And there's just been a lot of exploring guilt and time and loss. And the third book really gets into a lot of that darker stuff. And I think it's because that's where we all kind of are and what we're working our way through right now. And then, now I feel like I'm finally seeing the light at the end of this tunnel with this pandemic. So I think the end of the book hopefully will have a silver lining. I know. I'm in the dark night of the soul part of writing it right now, but I think I'm going to emerge into the beautiful part. I hope. I hope it will end somewhere beautiful, but I can't promise.
No, I think that's really interesting. So I feel like a lot of authors have kind of ended up in these, kind of this divide of, are you writing something more fun because you need something like escapist and you need something easygoing, or are you writing something where you can really like kind of channel this feeling of, I don't know, it's like, maybe a combination of like hopelessness or just confusion, or just kind of like, what is going on around me, and just watching everything that's unfolding. So it's interesting hearing where people end up on that.
I know. And I think there is a lot of people kind of looking back on that, because you're sitting here with nothing to do. You're sitting here stuck in your house. And there's sort of a lot of looking back on missed opportunities and missed chances and things that you would have done. If you had known that there was a pandemic starting, I would have taken that trip to whatever. And then making plans for the future of, next time I get a chance to do something, I'm not going to miss it. I'm not, I'm going to take the time off work. I'm going to bring the kids with me. I'm going to make it happen, because you start to realize how short life is and how many times you pass up an opportunity and it doesn't come again. It doesn't. I can tell you, I've been doing this a while. When you pass up opportunities, they don't come again. And sometimes that's a good thing. And other times you end up kind of looking back on it 10 years later, like, oh man, I should have done that. You didn't.
Yeah, no, I understand. It's a lot, I feel like, because speaking as someone who at this point, like, I graduated college into the pandemic, like, I'm still figuring out my 20s. Like, I haven't even like gotten to the halfway point yet. So when I think about it, I'm like, okay, great. What's this going to look like? What's this going to mean for me in the future? And, things like that.
Sorry that you're doing early 20s during this. Like, it's just, and it'll end. It's not forever. You're going to get to do all that stuff. But I know my stepdaughter's 20 and she's in college, and I'm like, oh man, when I was 20, I was backpacking through Europe. Like, she doesn't get to do that this year. That sucks. But maybe next year she will.
No, it's really, it feels like there's like no good age. It's everyone has like their different, you know, complexities that kind of come into play with this whole pandemic. Because it's like, even when you think about it and you're like, okay, what do you actually get from that period of time where you're like 23 to like 26? It's like, what's really important about that? Rather than, it's like, you know, okay, great, I'm probably going to get my first like adult job. I'm going to have to grow up a little bit. Like, we'll figure things out. But it's, you know, and suddenly you start to like, kind of mourn for it. You're like, wait, all of a sudden I was really excited to be like 24 or, you know, whatever age it might be that you're turning. I don't know if anybody else has had that feeling, but it's like, oh, I wasn't looking forward to this originally, but like, I kind of am now.
Yeah, I know. There's no great time to be stuck in your house for a year. There's no year that anyone would say, oh, well, I didn't need that one. Like, you needed all of them. I know.
Yeah, it's really, it's something. It's a whole experience. But do you feel like you're consuming media or like reading books, watching movies, do you feel like they're leaning into darker territory also, or are you mostly channeling that into writing?
I'm reading a lot, but you know, it takes so long to make a book. The books I'm reading were written before this. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's a lot of the stuff that I'm reading and the TV I'm watching and stuff was made before this, but I'm definitely feeling that I have a shorter attention span for things that aren't informing the human condition in some way. You know, if it's just kind of fluff or if it's telling me something I already know, I'm like, I already know that. I could be reading something else right now. So yeah, there's definitely a feeling of, and with music too, I've been listening to so much music, and I'm kind of, you know, just because this is how I write, I walk and I listen to my music. And so there's definitely like looking for those lyrics that kind of make you think about something in a new perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually really interesting because I've been doing just that. I have kind of like little like notes that I leave for myself, and I'll hear something in a song and I'm like, wait, this is like exactly what I'm trying to communicate, but like in a bigger sense. Like yeah, no, that's really interesting that we have the same kind of.
I was joking because when I first started writing Everworld, Folklore came out, and like every single song on that album was like, oh, that's exactly what Marina is going through. I think everybody listened to that album and had the same reaction of, oh, that's my life, because she just writes such great universal lyrics. But I literally would just go and like listen to that album over and over again and start writing. Hi, baby. I told you there would be business. You found my scissors. Thank you, baby. I'm sorry, stop the interview. It's really important. We found this. Yeah, so there's definitely a lot of like finding art, finding music, finding TV that makes me sort of think and question and grow and put things in perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. And then just before I continue with my own questions, just a little like reminder for everybody who's here. If you have questions, you can put them into the little ask a question thing that's under us. It looks like we have a couple already, which is very exciting. So feel free to contribute. We'll be spending probably like 15 minutes answering, 20 minutes, depending on how many we get. So we'll keep it, you know, whoever wants to ask something, we'd love to hear from you. All right. So now kind of going back, is there anything about the publishing process that has surprised you?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I didn't know anything about book publishing. I really didn't. I didn't realize there are 4 stages to editing. I didn't realize that putting a book out takes like a year and a half. When I first got the book deal, they were like, it was 2019. And they were like, so this book is going to come out in winter of 2021, which is, they call it winter, but it's actually late March. It's a whole book thing. I didn't really understand. I still kind of don't get it, but it's considered a winter book. I was like, 2021, that's years from now. But that's just how long it takes. There's 4 stages of editing. It has to be printed. There's the ARC copies, the advanced reader copies. And so, yeah, by the time they put the book in a bookstore, it's been a while. And I didn't know there was going to be a pandemic in between those 2 things. So it changed a lot. Yeah, it changed a lot.
No, I definitely the pandemic thing and trying to navigate the first book is like a whole other, because I was I think in the middle of doing line edits, I want to say, and then I suddenly got an email that was like, everybody go home, like we like do not stay on campus, like and it's just like the whole thing just like shut down, and I was like, wait, I have things I have to do, I have a book I have to suddenly write in the middle of all of this. I'm like, what's happening?
This is bad timing for me. I'm really busy right now, so can we do this pandemic later?
It's like I don't have the brain capacity for this. Like it's just there's a lot of things kind of happening all at once. So it's really, and like trying to figure out how to like market in the middle of all of this, how to even be like a new author. It's like doing virtual events rather than, you know, going to places in person.
Now like this though, I was like, you know, when you first know you have a book coming out, you're like, oh, I'm going to be in bookstores. I'm going to invite all my friends. I'm going to sign books. It's going to be great. We'll go for coffee after. Like you have this whole vision of what it's going to be like. And it doesn't involve Zoom at all when you visualize it.
No, yeah, I definitely get that. All right, so kind of like switching gears a little bit. This is one of my favorite questions because I always think about it when I'm reading things is how did you pick your character names? Because I know for me, it's like a lot of like baby name websites and just kind of going off of this like feeling of like a name is right for a character. But I'm like, does anybody else actually like how does this work?
Every now and then a name pops into your head, and like with Kieran, I was like, his name is Kieran. I just knew it. I don't even know anyone named Kieran. It's like an Irish name. He's not Irish. I don't know why. I just knew that was his name. But Marina, her name was MG in the first draft, which was main girl, because I literally did not know her name. I didn't know who she was. And then everyone started calling her M, and I was like, oh, M, that's a cute nickname. And then finally, when I was doing the second draft, I was like, I have to give this poor child a name. And then I was like, Maria Grace, because it's MG. I didn't want to change MG. And I was like, that's a stupid name. That like no one has actually named that. So not a stupid name if it's your name. It's beautiful. It's just not, it just didn't seem like a real girl, like a teenager today's name. And then I finally landed on Marina because it's Spanish. I like to use, Spanish is my second language, so I like to use it and stuff a lot. And it's like, oh, Marina, it's like from the sea and how beautiful, and I can have water imagery. So she became Marina. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, it literally was like, I need an M name. But yeah, names are hard sometimes.
That's such an interesting journey for it. Oh, God.
And then in book one, I had this throwaway character who I didn't think we were ever going to see again. So I named him Adam because it's my brother's name and I didn't have any A names yet. So I was like, oh, Adam, that's good. I'll use that. It's timeless. He ends up becoming this major character in book 2 and 3. And I'm like, if I had known that, I probably would have given him a different name. But you don't know when you're starting something, you don't know where everything's going to go 3 books later.
Yeah, no, I definitely understand that. That's a really interesting point to bring up too, is like, sometimes you just do things and you're like, yeah, this will work for the first one. And then it's like, you know,
and then you realize that you really shouldn't name characters after people you know in real life if you don't know where the character is going. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's a fun story. That's really, because for me, it's just kind of like, I'll just scroll through lists and I'm like, okay, whatever like stands out to me. And I'm just, what a weird way of kind of picking names. Cause I'm like, what does that even mean? Like, I'm just going to pick.
And you want it to mean something, but not be like so on the nose, and it should feel organic. And sometimes it's just like, oh my God, her name is Jenny. Jenny is a name and it's just her name.
It's really, yeah. And then, okay, so we've talked about this a little bit with kind of like growing up and figuring out ourselves and channeling things into writing. But because you write young adult fiction, it's assumed that your audience skews a little bit younger. So are there any kind of like messages or takeaway points that you really wanted young readers to get from Downworld?
You know, I never wanted to lecture because I know that when I was younger, I never wanted anyone to lecture to me, and I would immediately walk away if I thought something was trying to like teach me a life lesson. But inevitably, characters do learn things. Characters do go through changes. And with Marina in particular, she was so insecure and unsure of herself and so lost when we first meet her that I knew she would go on a journey of confidence and a journey of self-knowledge and become someone who knew her strengths and who was confident in those strengths. And I loved exploring that she's really good at math. She's really good at science. She ends up teaching engineering. She ends up really going into science-based studies. And for me, it was the opposite. I was an English major, but for me, I was like, oh, I'm so proud of her. Like, like in book 2, she gets into a good college, and I'm like, I'm so proud of her. She got into college.
No, that's exactly how it feels when you're writing a book where you're kind of like, oh, this is great. Like, I'm so happy for them. Like, it feels like it's a real person who you're just kind of like engaging with. Yeah, it's like, no, this is not a real person. Like, I don't know this person. Everything that's coming out of this is like from my brain. So none of this should be a surprise. And yet somehow I still manage to surprise myself sometimes with what I write.
Your character does something and you're like, oh, good, she found a way out of that situation. And you're like, don't realize it was you. I know. But yeah, there was definitely part of me. There was some wish fulfillment too. There was like, okay, when I was a teenager, what if the boy you have a huge crush on likes you back? What if the subject you have a really hard time with, you suddenly realize you're actually really good at? Like there's definitely, it's your book. You can have all the wish fulfillment you wanted.
No, and I think that's nice too. I always like the wish fulfillment. Like for me personally, like I love a little bit of like escapism or just something where you're like, yeah, that's great. Like I love just like something positive or a good spin. I don't know. I tend to lean that way where I'm like, I want a little bit of positive messaging at least, just like a tiny bit.
Something and you want really things to work out. If, you love these characters. You want things to work out for them. You want the hard work to pay off. You want the risk they took to pay off. Whereas sometimes in life, sometimes it doesn't, and that's life, but books should be more fulfilling than that,
Yeah, no, that's definitely, I completely agree. And then kind of just to wrap up my questioning, so did you have any advice for aspiring writers?
Oh boy. Honestly, I never know what to say to young writers because, the first thing people ask me now is, should I put my book on Wattpad? Which my answer is yes. Yes, you should. It probably won't get a publishing deal. The odds are very slim, not necessarily because your book isn't good, but just because they only publish 5 books per season and there's a billion books. That said, what I've learned from posting weekly, what I've learned from connecting with the audience directly and from people posting comments on the book and writing to me and saying, I love this part, or I'm confused by this part, or why does she do this? It's made me such a better writer. It really has. It's made me have to answer not just to myself, but to my audience, to my readers who have questions. And if I don't have the answer, I better come up with a better chapter then. I better write it better, because if I don't know the answer, then neither does the character. And then, it's not working. So it has 100% made me a better writer to put it on Wattpad. That said, is it going to lead to a publishing deal? I don't know. Yeah. I think you and I both had that sort of like dream experience of really hard work that just paid off at the right time.
Yeah, I think publishing is just a whole game of luck. It's like, okay, the stars just happen to align in this one instance, and you never know when it's going to happen. But yeah, no, I've had a very similar experience with Wattpad where it's like, I remember when I was writing the first draft of Revenge of the Sluts, I got comments at the end of it that were like, wait, who is this person? Like, why did they do this? What is going on? Like, what? Like, it didn't make any sense. So I was like, okay, bad whodunit. Like, this didn't work. Let's try it again. We'll do this. We'll give this a second shot.
It tells you what to fix, though. It really helps you.
Exactly. Yeah. It's hard, but it's really helpful. I think having people could just come in and be like, this part doesn't make any sense, or this part sucks. It's like, it really builds kind of a thick skin of like, all right, that's
the other thing too, is like a lot of the comments are really positive, but some of them are like, I don't like this guy. I don't like this character. And you're like, okay, well, he's not going away. So you're just gonna have to not like him.
It's like, yeah, no, it's really just being able to understand like what you should listen to, what you shouldn't, whose advice you need to take. It's like, at what point do you as a writer need to step in and be like, no, I really like this character and I like exactly how he's written. So
part of it too is just because one person didn't like something doesn't mean you should drop it. But if 10 people didn't like it, then maybe there's a note there.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so shifting into questions, we actually got a good number. Okay, so kicking this one off, so any dream casting of if Downworld was to become a film or TV show?
I get asked this a lot, but like the characters are so young. They're like 17 and 18. So if it becomes a show, whoever's playing these characters is 15 right now. I don't know who they are. So I don't know. Every now and then I'll see a young, what's her name? Like Olivia Rodrigo. I'll see someone like her and I'm like, oh, she could be Marina. She'd be perfect. But I don't know. I honestly don't know. Cute young people.
And then the next one is bringing it back to T Swift, which is really exciting. I was just listening to her. If you could pick a song or an album to represent Downworld, which would it be?
Oh, it's folklore. Yeah, it is. And to the point where when I'm posting the third book, at the end of like half the chapters, I'm like, if you want to watch this cardigan video, it's kind of perfect to go with this chapter. Or like Exile, there's a whole scene at the beginning of the third book that's just exile, basically. So yeah, that's
I love that. Are there any other artists similar to T Swift who've had that kind of impact on you with writing?
I listen to a lot of Lana Del Rey. It's usually sad women, which is weird because I'm not a sad woman at all. But when you really get into especially the great lyricists, like Lana Del Rey's lyrics are amazing. Taylor Swift's lyrics are amazing. And it just sort of gets you thinking on another level. So it's usually women. Every now and then, I'm trying to think if there's a guy that I listen to where I'm like, I do listen to a lot of old music, like old Bob Dylan, where you're like, okay, I can just always go back to Bob Dylan and it'll take me on a journey. But yeah, it's a lot of the women are kind of killing it right now. Camila Cabello and everyone, they're slaying it right now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I fully agree. I have like a writing playlist that I'll go back to every once in a while when I really need something as background noise. And it's just all women. It's like women in guitars, women in piano, women like, yearning.
Male musicians, I do. I don't know why, but I guess because I don't know, the woman part of our brain is like, I connect to this journey on a very deep level.
No, absolutely. Yeah. I really feel that. All right. If you could visit a classical fantasy world like Oz or Narnia by walking through a magical door, which would it be? This is a really interesting question.
I never wanted to go to Oz. It always seemed very scary to me. It's got witches and poison puppies. I didn't like it. Narnia. I mean, when you growing up and reading the Narnia books, you're always like, can I go there? Can I have Turkish delight? What is that? And like, what would it taste like? I know. I remember being obsessed with Turkish delight when I was a kid. Like, is it candy? Is it food? What is it? Is it white? Is it fluffy? Does it taste like marshmallows? Yeah, probably Narnia. Yeah, that would, and just, I've been obsessed lately with Sarah J. Maas. I've been reading the whole Court of Thorn and Roses series and like literally read all 4 books in like 2 weeks. I couldn't put it down. So yeah, anywhere where there's beautiful fairies floating around, I think is probably where I would go right now.
Yeah, no, that sounds really nice. That sounds like a good change of pace from what's happening right now.
Yeah.
And then is your favorite genre to read the same as your favorite genre to write? So, and then kind of going along with that, I guess, like what have you actually been reading lately, if you want to talk about it?
Funny. I don't read a lot of sci-fi, but I've been, okay, I'm looking at my bookshelf right now. I've read all the Sarah J. Maas's. I'm reading The Evercruel Kingdom, which is the second book of Rin Chipeko's duology of The Never Tilting World, which is really good so far. I love sweet romance. I just read all of Jenny Han's summer books, The Summer I Turned Pretty, that whole series. I literally read, there are 3 books this big and I read it in 3 days.
Oh, that's the best feeling.
I know, it's funny. I either read something that's like huge, epic, otherworld, oh my God, I'm surrounded by fairies, like I'll never get back to Earth. Or it's like the sweetest, like Jojo Moyes, like little romance, or Moyes, how do you say her name? Jojo Moyes, where it's just like a sweet romance that doesn't make me think too hard.
Yeah, no, I think having the back and forth is really nice. Like I tend to find myself reading, like, I don't know, I'll read something really heavy in fiction and I'll be like, wait, I need to change the pace. And then I'll pick up something like a nonfiction book just to like change it up a little bit, just to be like, okay, I need like a different tone. And it's like, I never know what feeling is going to strike me. It's just like, I'll wake up one day and I'll be like, oh, I want to read something cute.
I do. Like right now I'm reading A Través de mi Ventana, which is the one that they're making a Netflix show out of right now, through my window, which is from Wattpad. It's what's her name? Ariana Godoy. And I don't even know where she's from, but it's this really sweet, after style sexy book, and it's going to be a Netflix show. So a lot of times, like if I hear a Wattpad book is becoming a show or a movie, I'm like, okay, I have to read that. I have to know what that is. Like, what is it? And it's usually the really sweet, sexy, like, love stories where I'm like, oh, okay, I get it.
It's really, really fun. And then let's see. So there's a question about staying focused while writing. So how do you not lose motivation and interest in a current story? And then I guess adding on to that too, like how do you enter the zone and then like actually stay there and not just have it for a couple of like fleeting minutes?
It's that's the mother of all questions. Right now, my schedule is so crazy that I have maybe 30 minutes between dropping the kids. I finally went back to school for the first time in a year. But so between dropping them off, eating a bagel, and having to like start one of my day jobs, I have 30 minutes. And so I literally sit down with my laptop and it's like, well, if you don't write it now, you're not going to. And I just literally like, okay, here's what happens next. And I just write it. I don't overthink it. So it's almost good that I'm so busy right now, because if I had more time to sit and think about it, I'd probably just screw around and not do it. So, yeah, but that's such a good question, because it is always that feeling of, I don't really know what happens next, and I'm kind of over it, and I have to go get my kids in 20 minutes. So I can't really think about that right now. But then there are other days where I'm like, this is my 30 minutes. Every other part of my day right now is for someone else, but this 30 minutes is mine and Marina's and this story, and no one's going to take it from me. And I turn off my phone and I'm like, this is my 30 minutes. So there's that feeling. You have to celebrate having that time instead of feeling like it's a thing you have to do.
Yeah, I really love that, because it's really interesting too that you bring up this idea of like not having the structured schedule. I feel like I'm running into the same thing right now, because everything kind of got basically thrown for a loop. Like everything changed for me in the pandemic. So it's like, what do you do with that? Like I all of a sudden have time to write and I'm like, should I be writing? Like I had a couple of months, like basically the summer for me was the first flexible summer I've had in forever, because I couldn't really go anywhere. I couldn't really see anybody. So I'm like, great, I have all this time to write. I can't, like, I would look at my documents and I'd be like, I don't know what I want to say. I don't know what to do. I can't motivate myself to do it. So it's really interesting. You found that the structure.
I have to make it part of my structure. It's part of my day. And I realized that if I can do it in the morning, I don't write well at night. I really don't. I'm tired. It's been a long day. I have laundry to fold. I do not write well at night. But if I can schedule in that time in the morning where that's what I'm, you brush your teeth at this time and you write at this time, and that's just the way it is, then you don't have that sort of luxury of saying, well, I feel like doing something else instead.
Yeah, no, I absolutely understand. One of the things that I've missed most is having like a structure of being able to say, okay, this is exactly when I need to sit down and write, and exactly when I'm going to do this thing. I really do feel like it helps significantly, even if it can be hard. I think sometimes like switch it on, which was something I was also learning, was it's really hard to sometimes get into the mode of things and be ready to write.
One of the best pieces of advice I ever heard was someone said that whenever they're writing, they leave off in the middle of a sentence. They literally stop in the middle of a sentence. So when you sit down to write again, the first thing you do is you finish that sentence and then you're writing.
No, that's great.
It's like, well, I think it kind of works, because as soon as you sit down and start typing, I have to finish the sentence.
Oh, I love that. I'm going to start using that. I've had a couple of times when I've definitely cut off in the middle of sentences, but mostly out of like, I just can't write this anymore. I cannot bring myself to finish this sentence. Like, I do not know what I'm trying to say.
There are times when in the middle of a sentence, you're like, I hate this sentence. I hate this whole paragraph. And I don't even want to write this right now.
It's really, writing is like the best and worst thing in the whole world. I have moments when I'm like, why am I doing this to myself? Why am I writing this? But it's so worth it, which is I think why we keep going back.
I like this question here. Do you find endings or beginnings harder? Do you see that?
Yeah.
Endings are hard. Endings are so hard. Beginnings are, you can't screw up the beginning, because whatever you say in the beginning is true, and you'll just pay it off later. And there it is. That's just the truth. But the ending, you got to pay off all the stuff you wrote. You got to make it go somewhere. You got to make it make sense. You got to have something kind of surprising. It's got to be satisfying. Endings are so hard. That is a good question.
I definitely get it. I love a good exposition. And then it's like everything after that, I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing anymore. Like, it's, even if I go into it with a structured plan, I'm still kind of like, okay, we've made it to the actual story. Now what do I do?
Well, because I always get to the end where I'm like, I knew what I was gonna do, but it's kind of obvious, and I don't want to do anything obvious. So, what else can I do?
Yeah, no, it's really hard keeping things kind of like fresh. And it's really,
Yeah.
I mean, have you been running into that with your, I don't like, I mean, with your 3 books, it's how different or how difficult has it been to kind of differentiate, if that makes sense?
It's been really hard. It's been really hard because I do write very cinematically. So I want to have a big action set piece at the end, but I also want it to be an emotionally satisfying set piece. But I also want to satisfy the character arcs. And then, like for book 2, it was a little bit easier because I knew I had a whole other book to really finish everybody's story. So it was okay if everyone left off in a little bit of a limbo. But now I'm finishing book 3 and it's the last book. So it's got to be a big set piece and it's got to really tell the end of the story for the characters and their emotional journey. And that's a lot. That's a lot to stick in the end of a book.
Yeah,
When you
no,
have 30
it's
minutes.
really, it'll be a really exciting kind of seeing, I think, what happens with that and where the characters end up. And it's just, it is, I think there's an extra level that goes into it when it's wrapping up a whole series where you've really gotten to know the characters and really have lived in that world.
I know. And you love them and you want them to have a good ending.
Yeah. Like we have like, I want to say like 4 minutes left if anybody has any lingering questions. Hopefully I grabbed all of the ones that were put into the question and answer box. Does anyone have any? I mean, Rebecca, did you have anything you kind of wanted to like reflect on or say, or anything you wanted to have people know?
No, this was awesome. And if you haven't read our books yet, there's a discount button. You can get 10% off. And I think the code word is event. So you guys should absolutely get Revenge of the Sluts. I love that book. I really did. I read it in a day. I was like, well, I'm just going to read one more chapter. And I was like, one more chapter. It was one of those where it was dinner time. And I was like, kids, go make a sandwich.
The best kind of compliment.
Yeah, no, it was great. It's great. Okay, cool.
Yeah. All right. Like
Natalie, thank you so much for doing this.
This was really exciting. I honestly, I love Downworld. I thought it was just, it's such a fun book and it's amazing. And I really love the characters and I love I really am not much of a sci-fi reader. I grew up in like the age of like early dystopian kind of like YA. So like Hunger Games and when I was a huge fan of, I think it's Delirium by Lauren Oliver. Like it was kind of those like, I'm like, I don't want to, I'm like, I hope that's the right title for it, but definitely was like in that.
I've read like Panic and some of her other books.
Yes. Yeah. No, it's a really, and that for me was really kind of a great foundational stage. I just was never really into sci-fi outside of that. And then when Downworld came, I was like, wait, this is going back to like what I read as a teenager. Like this is exactly, it fits into such a great, like, you can bond with the characters, you can like explore this whole new world, you can explore like your own world through the eyes of someone else. It was wonderful. So
yeah, there was like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, there was a great boom for fantasy sci-fi, kind of dystopian sci-fi. I loved all those books too.
Yeah, no, it's exciting to see it kind of coming back. I love this idea of like, I'm excited to see where things go in the future too. And I'm excited for you to have your books coming out and just to see where the series goes. And congratulations on getting book 2 done and also having it's like, there's a whole bunch, I feel like, first book getting published, you have your second manuscript done, you're working on your third one. I feel like there's a lot of congratulations in order for you. It's a lot of work.
I mean, it came quickly. Book 2 came really quickly and book 3 is coming really slowly, which I think makes sense because it's the end and you gotta get it right. But it's at least we've been productive. At least we got some stuff done during this pandemic.
It's a good feeling. It's good to know. But all right, it sounds like we are. Do we have any word on second book? I'm not sure if you'd be able to talk about it contractually.
No, anything, yeah.
Okay.
You can read the first draft on Wattpad right now.
All right, amazing. Thank you so much to Barbara's Bookstore for hosting this. Thank you everyone for coming and spending time with us. This was wonderful. I love talking with you, Rebecca. It was great to see your face and great to meet you.
Yeah.
All right. Have a good one, everyone.